Hello, and welcome to the Full of Ship podcast. Real answers to real problems. With your host, Kyle Henderson, CEO and co-founder of Vision, a podcast dedicated to demystify the chaotic, often turbulent world of ocean freight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of Full of Ship. I'm your host, Kyle Henderson. And today's guest is Jim McCullen, the Chief Information Officer at Century Distribution Systems. Jim is an avid productivity hacker, mountain biking outdoorsman, and as I mentioned, Chief Information Officer at a great supply chain technology company. Jim, welcome to the podcast today.
Thanks, Kyle. It's great to be here. I look forward to a fun conversation with you about supply chain.
Really fantastic to have you here. Thank you for sharing your time with both Full of Ship and our audience. And we usually like to get started by sharing a little bit about people's professional background, maybe a little bit about your personal background. So could you walk us through a little bit about your role as the CIO at Century Distribution, and maybe even tell us what Century Distribution is, teach us about the company?
Absolutely, Kyle. So I've been in supply chain for the past 30 years. I started really young. I'm not that old, and started really at Century as the only IT person in the organization. First thing they did was fly me all over the world. I spent weeks and months traveling all over Asia, all over Europe, implementing systems to help shippers, importers be able to see what was happening with their supply chain. And that was, starting 30 years ago. And it's been an amazing journey all the way through to today of just really helping customers solve complex supply chain problems. It's every day you wake up to some new form of chaos in our space today. So it's certainly pretty exciting that way. A little bit of background on myself, originally from New Jersey, spent the last 20 years down here in Richmond, Virginia, still consider myself a Jersey boy. Live supply chain every single day, and just always find a new challenge to come about with. From Century's standpoint, and just as far as our group, so we've got a really large IT team located here in North America and in Asia that supports all of our operations and all of our customers. And Century, we're a global logistics provider, and it's interesting. We're a real kind of niche space within supply chain. And so what we do is our core business is called origin cargo management. Some folks, it goes by PO management. It's gone by buyers consolidation in the past. It's basically, we have staff all over the world at every port, and they are there to be the eyes and ears and hands of our customers, major retailers, manufacturers, wholesalers in North America. And so it's really interesting because, for our customers, we have Amazon, Canadian Tire Corporation, QVC, Specialized Bikes, one of my favorites. We'll talk about that in a bit. But every major retailer out there uses somebody like Century, and so uses an origin cargo management provider. But yet, if you looked across the space, like, we don't have a magic quadrant, right? We're not recognized that way in the space. But yet, whether it's Target, Walmart, Lowe's, Home Depot, any of those guys, they're all using somebody like Century to be on the ground at origin, making sure that the right cargo is moving at the right time to the right place. And we do all of that in our platform called VMS. And so that's where the tech comes in. And so we're a combination of both a operations company, with boots on the ground around the world, but also tech in delivering these supply chain solutions. So we marry two things together. We get all of our customers' purchase order data. The vendors are booking against that. And then we're managing the bookings with the ocean carriers all electronically. So yeah, we're a gateway, a gatekeeper, a middleman in the process. And we're kind of a hidden asset in a lot of places.
So living supply chain for 30 years. The one thing I don't understand is, where do you get time to do all this mountain biking I hear about?
Yeah.
From the rumors, you have a dedicated training schedule you're sticking to. No, tell me a bit more about Jim outside of supply chain.
Yeah, so it's mountain biking is absolutely my passion, and I think if you talk to anybody that knows me, you'll find that somehow I weave mountain biking into any story or presentation that I'm doing. It's you're an ultra marathoner and athlete as well. You get it. It's that opportunity to kind of go into a zone and like just be focused on that one thing is so enriching, right? And so to be able to be out on the trails, either on a race, or just out with buddies, you're able to just kind of let everything else go and focus on this. Because if you don't, you're going to hit a tree or fall off a cliff or something like that, right? And so, so it is important to focus. And then it's also just about being able to constantly see what you're capable of doing, right? And so many cases, like when I go into a really challenging presentation or meeting or something like that, I'll think back to the prep to come into like a 5 or 6 hour mountain bike race, and it's like, okay, I survived that, I can survive this meeting, right? And so yeah, it's just something that, and I think everybody needs something like that, right? And then when you talk about scheduling, fortunately, with this new world that we live in, before it was you're in the office every day, and my workouts were at 5 a.m. or trying to figure it out at night, or so now I can find a point in the day where I can block out that time to work out. I mean, I'm up super early in the morning and working and, flexing my schedule around because I've got a global team, but I can find that pocket of time. And, I challenge everybody out there, like, you've got to look out for yourself first, right? And you've got to box that time for yourself and then wrap everything else around it, because everything else is going to take up your time.
Well, you wrap a lot of things around a lot of things, it sounds like. And from my notes here, you have a history of productivity hacking. So is that is that the trick? You just have to be extremely efficient at wrapping it all together and not burn a calorie without a return.
It's absolutely true. It's yeah. So I think I've got a little bit of ADD somewhere in there that I never got diagnosed with, and so I need to have kind of lists and structure around me. And so I've got a lot of like processes and things that I've built to manage my day. I have a system I created called Control Your Day, and then I use a lot of process every day to manage myself and to make sure I'm delivering on what I need to. But what that allows you to do is really hone in on and decide, like, okay, what is my focus for today? What are the key things that I'm going to do today? Because otherwise you just spin and you get to the end of the week and you're like, okay, I didn't get anything I wanted to get done, but I was busy all week, right? And so you've got to like plan it out, right? And it's Sunday, I sit down and figure out, okay, what workouts do I need to do? When am I slotting them in? And then my calendar fills in around that.
When did you put together your Control Your Day program? Or like, how did it come into being? Because I imagine you didn't have it 30 years ago when you started on your career, right?
Yeah, no, 30 years ago, I had index cards in a folder, and every project was on an index card that I would move around. Yeah, Control Your
They
Day
did
is,
do, container yards the same way 30 years ago.
exactly right. It's very true. Yeah, so I went through all the different over the years, all the different technologies as they came out to keep yourself organized, and it really did start with index cards, in a folder. But Control Your Day, and thanks for asking about that. It's an email management system that I in essence created using Microsoft Outlook about 12 years ago. And so it's just a very different way of managing your email and managing your day. It's based on a lot of the ideas behind from David Allen's book, Getting Things Done. Fantastic book. And really that was kind of one of my starter points in getting more and more organized and structured. And I highly recommend it. It was written 20 years ago, but it's still a fantastic book. And so then I built a framework using his concepts, but using Microsoft Outlook as the platform. And then, wrote a book about it, published that on Amazon. It's been like, if you go out on Amazon right now and search for email management, my book will usually come up in the first or second slot. And I published it 10 years ago, and then created a Udemy course for it. It's got a great following there. And a lot of the ideas you could apply to any email solution, but, it's really just about, as individuals, we need to recognize and figure out, like, what is that process that works for me? And there's lots of great solutions out there. You don't have to apply 100% of that solution. You can find the parts that really work well for you and apply those. And it makes a huge difference.
Now, whether it's structuring your day or structuring the information about your day, this is making me think about a topic you and I have chatted a bit about in the past. And we've gotten to encounter each other, I think, multiple times throughout the past few years. Now, this topic is data, and data's usually a hot topic on this podcast as well. And I was kind of curious what your take is specifically around supply chain technology companies, information technology. Now, w- with your role, CIO, no, I understand it from the perspective of helping to lead a technology company in the supply chain and logistics space. Do tech companies do enough to really educate buyers on the possibilities of data, like the opportunities around analytics and what that means for like using tech solutions to change their business in some way, shape, or form? And I realize I just opened up a big can of worms, but feel free to dig in.
Okay. Yeah.
Go wherever you want with that one.
Yeah, no, it's a huge topic for us across the supply chain space. There's first off, there's so much data, right, available to us today from so many places, and there's so many tech companies now in the logistics space trying to make use of, create, share those data sets, and like there's a really good map out there called Lodge Tech, and it's basically
Yeah.
like the top 150 supply chain tech companies that are out there, and new companies forming every day. So there's lots and lots of different companies coming up, figuring out how can we use this data and make it valuable. To your question about are these companies doing enough to show the value of the data, I think there's a couple parts there. I think one is that there's a tendency to over market the capabilities today. And so, as a supply chain professional, if you're just looking at this tech solution and saying, okay, this is going to solve all my problems, might not, right? There's a lot of challenges out there in the quality of the data in our space. And so I do think really kind of defining, okay, marketing is fantastic, and yes, I understand like all these possible bells and whistles, but what can I get out of it and use today, right? And I think as shippers and players that are consumers of these solutions, those are the questions that we really need to be asking. Are okay, like let's really just talk about what's 100% there that I can count on and share, right? Because as a supply chain professional, like if you look at somebody, at a retailer or someone like that, they are now disseminating that information across their organization. And while that supply chain professional understands the complexities of our space and the challenges, those buyers and merchandisers and others don't know, don't care, right? They just want their product there when they expect it. And so, yeah, I think it's on us as tech companies as well to be able to have that honest discussion of what's really there right now, and what we're still working on. So those two sides of it, and then around communicating the value of the data, I do think there's opportunities there to be able to say, look at this outcome, look what I can help you with, right? I'll start my first mountain bike and kind of comparison here. When I'm racing down a trail, I've got to be looking out ahead of the trail to anticipate what's coming, to pick my route, right? If I'm looking down at that rock, at that log as I'm coming over it, I'm toast, right? The next thing's going to hit me, and I'm history. And in supply chain, it's the same thing, right? Like we've got to figure out how can we look ahead to understand what's happening. Sentry does a lot of that for our customers at Origin. So, when that vendor is creating the booking, we're doing a whole bunch of analysis to determine, like, is that product going to make it where it needs to go on time? Are there problems with, the product's inspection or anything like that? Let's catch all that now and not later. So like those rocks or logs in the trail, I need to have thought about that and in essence already dealt with it in my head. Right. And so that's where I think supply chain tech companies can really help, is by saying, hey, like, this is how we can help you see ahead, see one step ahead. And that's what we try to do at Century every day.
I'm curious, with your history in the space, not necessarily what tech company, but like what data set and like what technology solution did you really start seeing get traction and kind of like start changing this space? in your career? Maybe it could be something recent. It could have been something 30 years ago, but like I'm trying to think of like these inflection moments of like where data started making a difference to maybe the cargo owner.
Yeah, I think in honesty, it it started with the ability to move large amounts of data, right? And so, as internet connectivity became better, as data storage became bigger, as cloud services became more realistic, right? This ability to share information in real time, really came into play. Whereas before it was batched older data, right? And so by the time you got it in your hands, it was almost too old to be valuable, right? So I think that's been a big transformation for us in doing that. I also think companies like yourselves are doing an amazing job in going out there and collecting all the information and cleansing it and presenting it when we talk about shipment visibility. We've honestly been doing that for the last 20 or 25 years where so we're connected with every ocean carrier. We integrate with ports, we integrate with vessel positioning systems and all of that to bring that data in. A lot of the same things that you do. I think the real value that your company brings to the space is that one of those Logitech companies that's just getting started today or last year, they don't have to go through all the pain and suffering that I went through to get to where I am today,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if I was starting the company over again today, it would just be like, okay, Kyle, let's connect and get this going. Right? Like, I don't need to do all that work. And I think that's really an important piece for shippers out there to be thinking about is, like trust companies like Century and Vision to be able to give you the data sets that you need so that you don't have to go chase them everywhere, right?
Yeah.
Like you don't need, and that was another big transformation too. And even at Century, let's say 5 years ago, it was more, okay, these are your carriers. The data that they provide will provide to you, right? And that has really shifted now to we own the data, and if that carrier is not providing it, we got to go get it somewhere else, right? And bring it into the set. And I know we'll talk more on the API front and those kind of things, but certainly in our space, we're still struggling with any kind of standards for data exchange today. So that's another topic.
So it sounded like you were saying as, more technology focused companies have entered the space, what it's done in some way for the cargo owner is it's almost reduced the cost of change.
Yeah, that's a fair statement. I think it has reduced the cost because of the new kind of SaaS based models, right? Whereas before you would have to go invest a lot of money and spend a lot of time to see some result, right? Whereas today you can sign up for a SaaS contract and start seeing stuff tomorrow, in essence, right? So the speed to market is much faster. And what I've seen, it's been a dramatic change over the last 2 or 3 years with COVID, where organizations from a supply chain standpoint used to move much slower in their decision making process. What I've seen over the last couple of years are organizations, and talking about shippers and importers, retailers, moving much faster, being willing to take more risk to implement something that may help them. And because they don't have a massive capital investment to do it, they can. Right. And then the other thing that I've seen dramatic change again in the space is, 5 years ago, we would just deal with a logistics team at a company, right? And in essence, we would have to provide all the IT support because they really wouldn't get any from their own organizations. Today, we're having the conversations with the CIOs of those organizations because they absolutely want to be involved and they want their teams to be able to support the supply chain initiatives of the organization. So that's been fantastic to see.
With the basic assumption that time is money, I think you were alluding to this kind of next question I'm asking, which is, if I said the explosion of technology offerings in the space have really kind of reduced the cost of change. In some sense, you could say that's also reduced the time to value. You can get there faster. So on this topic, and with your experiences, you've helped many cargo owners navigate the space of adopting technology. But how do how do you advise cargo owners on how to properly purchase technology at the space. Like, okay, it's faster, it's more affordable, but there's also a lot more options, and
Mhm.
maybe in as you mentioned, the last like 2-3 years, it's also been a little bit of a boom time. Everyone is like kind of popping up and saying they can do everything all of a sudden. Well, I, I'll take everyone at face value that they can do
Right.
everything that they're saying they're doing, but that means there's a lot of different options to evaluate. So, like, in this kind of almost noisy space now, like, how are you helping your customers navigate both understanding their technology need and helping them get matched with the right technology solution?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's and from Century's side, it's almost the same question internally, right? Like, when do we decide it's better for us to add to our VMS platform, which is this complete supply chain visibility and operations platform, or where does it make more sense for us to plug in providers that are delivering great value that can get us to market instantly, right? And so we're making that decision every day. And when I'm talking to customers about those very same topics, um, it's how do you pilot it, actually, let me take one step back on some of the technologies that we're looking at. What we'll do is actually partner with the customer and that provider, and we'll, like, let's say it's a data provider like yourselves, we'll bring that data into our platform, into our data warehouse and other places like that, and analyze it, and then give them feedback, and let them know, like, yeah, this is really a good solution, you need this data, or it's not really giving you anything more than you've already got today, right? So that's one of the things Century is doing with our customers, is just helping them understand what are the options that are out there, for other sources of data. So that's kind of one area of focus. And then when you think about implementing these tech providers, again, I would say, always try to work, like, how can you define a pilot process with that provider? Because a lot of these companies are owned by private equity, right? And everybody wants a 3-year recurring revenue stream, right? And so one of the things that I've absolutely noticed is you really have to read contracts today. 5 years ago, it was kind of a 2-page boilerplate contract, and it was pretty simple and like, let's go. Nowadays, you've got to look at all that detail, because they are trying to lock in so that they can go back and say, hey, look, we've got all this recurring revenue for a long-term period. So you, as the buyer of this, need to look at that and understand, like, okay, well, let's regroup on this and let's start in some pilot so I can prove this out to the organization, and then, yeah, by all means, I'll sign a longer term contract. So that's a recommendation I would make, is you really spend time looking at the agreements and figure out, like, okay, how can you prove this out? Can I get a 90-day pilot in place? We've done that, with some of the, like, Tide devices, the little tracking
Mhm.
devices. They're fantastic. We've done pilots with customers where, hey, we'll get 400 or 500 of these devices. We'll get them out to our origin offices and let you experience it all, right? And use it for modeling your supply chain and that kind of thing, and then really decide before going in kind of full force. So that would be my recommendation, is suggestion, is figure out how to do it as a pilot, figure out how to do it in a short term, and clearly define, like, what are you expecting to get out of this? Because you could end up after that pilot and be like, okay, that was wonderful, but did do we proceed? Right. So yeah, it's and the other piece just on that is to think about too, like, you also want to be careful that you don't, like, the squirrel, right? Like, you don't want to be just, oh wow, that's cool, wow, this is cool, let's go here, let's go there.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden you could have, and you really need to be careful within your organization, because that squirrel is out there everywhere right now. And so you as a CIO could turn around and realize, oh my gosh, my purchasing team is implementing this, my logistics team just implemented
Yep.
this platform, and they're all similar, right? And so now I've got 5 platforms that I need to support, I need to protect my organization against, right? Because everything creates a cyber risk, attack risk to some degree. And so organizationally, we need to be looking at it and saying, to your point earlier, Kyle, like, a lot of these companies are merging into doing a lot of similar things. Well, we don't need 3 of them doing the same kind of thing.
A related topic, but not so much on the technology side, more on the buyer strategy side. I've been able to see this happen in a number of different companies across a few different industries in my 20 years. But often when you have an industry that's had kind of a bloom of technology offerings, there's a lot of startups that just kind of, show
Mhm.
up overnight type of thing, right?
Yep.
And some are getting more headway than others, and some find some success and get to a certain scale. But I'm kind of curious, how do you help the buyer navigate this POC process, or maybe it's even a separate process from POC, this kind of strategy process where sometimes a large enterprise cargo owner is hesitant to want to rely on a young early stage company. Uh, but what do you do in situations where there isn't necessarily a legacy reliable player in this space? Or maybe what I'm really asking is, have you seen the same pattern pop up where there's this kind of strategy decision that has to happen? And how have you seen enterprises successfully or unsuccessfully navigate it?
Yeah, it's certainly, we see it, every day, as we're looking at tech companies to partner with to and enhance our VMS platform. Yeah, and again, to remember, like, our role, the customers hire us to be, their origin cargo manager, their global logistics
Mhm.
provider, right, with this tech combination. But they also, expect that we can go in any direction that they need. So, you look at things like freight audit, for example, right? We don't deliver it directly, but we have companies that we work with that deliver that solution. And so we've done the due diligence and background work with the company, to make sure that they're capable and they can deliver the solution properly. And so our customer doesn't have to worry about it as much, right? And so I think having that enabler, is valuable. And some organizations, yeah, they've got lots of supply chain tech within their organization and they can manage that themselves. For others, they don't, right? And that's where, Sentry again can come into play, is that, okay, you've got a need for a very specific function, and it's something that Sentry can look at and say, let us go partner with that company, right? Like the freight audit, we partner with a company called Acutive Solutions and a couple of others. And so let us do all that legwork to make sure that it's a stable company and they know what they're doing, and build all the integrations to get the data to you, rather than you having to do all of that work yourself, right? So I think either you've got a team within the organization that can go out and evaluate these technologies, or you rely on a partner like Century that can look at it from, okay, what do you need operationally and how do I map in the right tech to solve for that, right? And again, it's, as you said earlier, there's so many new players coming into the space constantly. We need to be looking at them because some of them have some really great ideas, and some great technology that's coming together, and we don't want to miss out on that. But at the same time, we don't want to, like, be so spread out that we don't really understand what all the tech is doing.
Yeah, something you mentioned uh, in that response made me think, what's the trend right now for successful technology implementations? Is it better for Century and the end customer to be working with a partner who's kind of more broad and has a lot of different kind of solution offerings, or more narrow and deep and is highly like specific on solving one kind of tough problem set? I know it's a kind of very general question, but a moment ago you said, working with a technology partner who does something really, really specific. And so that made me wonder, uh, are we seeing a trend to more specificity or a trend towards, uh, "What do you want? I got it."
Yeah, so I think there's times where a cargo owner needs that broader picture, right? So when you think about ERP systems, TMSs, WMS, warehouse management systems, right? Like, those are complete solutions that they need to implement, right? And then when you have these targeted pieces, that's where I think it does make more sense to work with somebody to solve that problem, because you could go to one of these broad providers and they'll have a solution. They'll have something on their website that says they solve for that, right? But are they going to get you to where you need to go, right? And a lot of times what I've found is you get some immediate value right out of the gate, but then you can get so caught up in the details of getting from like 80% to 100% that you almost never get there, right? And so when you're dealing with company that's trying to do a little bit of everything, it's hard to do anything great, right? So that's where I do think, like, some of these really targeted tech companies can solve for a specific problem. Freight audit's a great example of that, right? That's what they do, and they do it really, really well.
Following up on that, we see a lot more APIs. I mean, we're very familiar with APIs here at Vision. It's kind of the core packaging of our products. But we see, APIs being ingested by many different platforms. So the original platform is now adding like more value by applying a single solution. Onboarding times have drastically changed because of that. Much faster to get essentially value delivered to the end customer. Do you see that continuing? And are there, kind of concerns or implications as more APIs are ingested in more platforms, or is like there's more diversity of say ingredients in your full solution?
Yeah, it's APIs are a double-edged sword. Right? There's really good stuff and really challenging things around it. Certainly, the connectivity side of an API, makes it really easy to figure out how you're going to talk to each other, right? About a data transaction. I think when you think about like a very simple application programming interface, think about like a UPS or FedEx API to track where your package is, right? Hey, I'm going to send you a package ID. You're going to tell me where it is. Really simple conversation that we're going to have, right? When you get into the more complex supply chain conversations, like let's think about, a customer sending purchase orders, right? And that customer is an apparel customer who has, case packs and size runs and all of these other things. And this other customer is a hard goods, importer who has very structured data. The variations of how that purchase order data comes across can be dramatic. And then sending shipping information back to that cargo owner or shipper, same thing, right? There's a lot of complexity in that. And so I think, from an application perspective, like when you think about these smaller interfaces like a WMS and being able to connect in to say, hey, I want to book an appointment, right? Like those are simple transactions that you can clearly define and map to. The challenges I think for us in the space right now are, yes, APIs are great and make the integrations easier, but the conversation that we're going to have inside that API is not well defined today. And so it's really kind of almost up to the two companies to decide, okay, how are we going to build this API to exchange purchase order data? It's not a standard. And like one of the big groups now out there is DCSA, Digital Container Shipping Association. And so what they've done is they got together and are defining the standards for ocean carriers to interact with us through APIs. That's fantastic, right? Because carriers, most of it was and still is EDI, right? And they're getting to APIs. But what they had before DCSA was, okay, we're building APIs, but every carrier had their own variation of it. So if you wanted to book with, carrier number one, you had to use their API, and carrier number two, their API, and then get a bill of lading back. Same thing, right? And so as integrators, now we've got to build all of these different conversations, right? So what DCSA is doing is saying, you're going to have one API conversation about track and trace. So now when I go connect with CMA or Maersk or anybody else, it's one conversation that I can repeat over and over again, right? And that will flow into like the bill of lading, the booking request, all of those things. So today I've got to build all these different integrations. In the future, it's a common language. So I think groups like that are really helping our industry to be able to agree on how we're going to talk. Century today, we end up being that translator because we sit in between these providers and these customers and figure out how to make the conversation work on both sides today. And so, yeah, I think in our industry, APIs great movement forward, but we've got to define the standards of what we're going to talk about in those APIs.
Well, as more platforms, more systems get interconnected, as more standards get built up, it seems like we're getting to a place where AI, machine learning, predictions can be applied and deliver value. But what's your take, Jim? Where are we right now? And where do you think we could be in short order on this topic of predictive or prescriptive or AI or ML? Have you seen successes anywhere yet?
Yeah, it's coming. I think where it's been valuable are things like production planning, inventory management, product ordering. When it comes to the true shipment visibility, and again, like you guys are doing amazing work in getting us there to this state of prediction around when things are going to be available, right? But as a beneficial cargo owner, right, like what they want to know is when is that vessel going to be in the port? When is that container going to be available for pickup? When's it going to get to my distribution center, right? And so on the predictive side of that, there's great progress being made. It's not all there yet. Like if you were to sit down and talk to somebody about supply chain and compare it to the airline industry, right? Like, okay, you can be pretty confident that your flight's going to arrive at this time or within these couple of hours. Yeah, occasionally there's a mechanical or something like that, right? But in the ocean industry, it's almost more the norm, right? And it's not just because of the carriers, it's port congestion, it's everything that we've been reading about and talking about. And so I think like with Vision and the access that you guys are doing with understanding what's happening at the ports, it's bringing all of those pieces together to understand what we think is going to happen and react to it, right? So like for example, in China, if we know, there's going to be an issue in the port of Ningbo and we've got some vision to that, then we can make decisions to reroute cargo, right? So that it doesn't get caught up in that port if there's, some storm coming through or whatever, right? So there's all these variables in our space that make it really challenging to be able to predict where we're heading. Back to the data sets, we've got so much more data now today, and we've got fantastic cloud-based solutions that can analyze this data and make predictions from it. So I definitely think we're much further along today. We're starting to see some of these technologies really start to add value, but there's still work to do. I don't know if that answered your question or not.
That was very helpful context from especially the perspective of kind of what Sentry does with origin management, and that was actually my next question. How do you see machine learning and prediction kind of changing what boots on the ground in origin management do in the future?
Yeah, that definitely opportunities there, right? So there's so much data. It's funny, Eric Johnson, you had him on your podcast, I think earlier this year, the senior editor at JOC. He's invited me to TPM Tech in February to be on a panel. And the title of the panel is "What's Old is New Again, the Reemergence of PO Management." So basically what he's saying is, okay, what I've been doing for 30 years is going to get sexy again. And I'm really excited about that.
Bring it sexy back.
Exactly. And so, this PO management, and, whether it's PO management with like a blended, operational tech player like us, or a pure tech player that's just focused on the delivering the solution from a system standpoint, it is all about the data and being able to use it to make decisions, right? And so, what customers need to be able to do is have their providers or whoever's at that front end of the supply chain be making decisions based on the data and the analytics of that data, right? And so some of those examples would be around, you think about loading optimization, right? So, we have hundreds and hundreds of vendors and thousands of vendors delivering product into our warehouses around the world every day. And so, we have a combination of data analytics and people today that are determining, okay, like let's hold this cargo back a few days so that we can more efficiently load these containers, or customer doesn't need it in their inventory right now, so let's figure out how to route it slower. I think I just saw an article the other day. Maersk is now offering a service to delay your cargo. I thought that was great.
It used to be free.
Everybody, yeah, exactly. It used to be free to get those delays. Now you got to pay extra for them. But yeah, so that's a perfect data science machine learning AI type solution where you can push all that data in and analyze it and make determinations, right? Think about like carrier routings. There's every carrier has multiple strings that route different ways, and they route at different speeds, right? And maybe they have more transshift ports involved. So we're doing a lot of analysis today on that information to present to the customers so that they can make good decisions, right? And the other piece that's so important on the data side is that I think what we're seeing in our space today is where we used to see these cycle times of like 5 to 10 years, we're seeing them in 5 months to a year, right? Where a year ago everybody was worried about how am I going to get my product moving, to now like, hey, I'm not in a rush and let me figure out the cheapest way to move my product, right? So that combination of the two really. So yeah, I think there's tons of opportunity from a data perspective to be able to make better decisions on behalf of the shippers at origin.
Well, Jim, thank you for being so gracious and kind and sharing your time with Full of Ship. And on behalf of myself and the audience, I'd like to say it's been great getting to learn from your experience and hear your perspectives on some of these very fun topics in the space. And before we go, I do remember we were chit-chatting about your productivity hacking, and it sounded like you wanted to make sure that we extended some of those productivity benefits to the audience. So I hear you have a little pitch or a little something to share with the audience. Maybe you can share that
Sure.
now.
Sure, absolutely. So as I mentioned, my book Control Your Day is out on Amazon, but I've also got a Udemy course that takes you through a lot of really good email tips and techniques just to be more efficient, and then talks about this whole Control Your Day management process. So yeah, I'd love to give away access to that course. So I'll share a link that you can include with the podcast on Udemy to be able to sign up for free for the first 100 people that decide to go after it. And I'm on LinkedIn. So if you have any questions or anything else about that side of it, about supply chain, about what Century does, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn.
Wonderful. Well, we'll get that link into the podcast description. And again, thank you for your time. This has been another episode of Full of Ship. Our guest today, Jim McCullen of Century Distribution Systems. And thank you for listening. See you next time on Full of Ship.
Thanks, Kyle.
Thank you for joining Kyle and his guest on the Full of Ship podcast. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time as Kyle continues to demystify ocean carrier tracking with his future guests.